Hi, this is Stan Bush.
Hi, this is Stephanie Calvert.
This is John Payne.
This is Jack Hughes.
Hey everyone, this is Britt Lightning from Vixen.
Hi, I'm Carrie Stevens.
Hello, I'm Kofi Baker.
And you're listening to Play That Rock and Roll with Joe Kay.
I found a copy of that Kerrang with Molly Hatchet on the cover on eBay, and I bought the copy. It isn't here yet. I was hoping I'd have it in time to show you, but I found scans of the interview. There's this Twitter account called Old Kerrang or something like that, and it posts up all these old scans of the interviews. So that's how I found you. I was reading through the Molly Hatchet stuff, and I found your cover story for him. So it is so cool to talk to you now. But let's go back to the beginning with Molly Hatchet and yourself. When did you first hear of Molly Hatchet, and what was it about him that made you a fan?
Well, I have to go back before Molly Hatchet to Leonard Skinner. And I don't know if you know this, but Southern rock was always very popular in Europe, especially like Germany and things. And I sort of knew the Who office quite well. And Pete Rudge, who was a road manager of the Who, said, look, we got this, we're taking over Molly Hatchet, not Molly Hatchet, for Leonard Skinner for Europe, and they're going to be supporting Golden Earring. So you've got to go and see them. Do you remember Golden Earring, Radar Love, that song? And
Twilight
he said,
Zone?
So he said, I'll get you in. So I first saw them in the Bournemouth Winter Gardens, which is a seaside resort, and they totally blew Golden Earring out the hall. I'd never seen anything like it. And these twin lead guitars, which we call chicken scratch guitars. And it was just unbelievable. And Ronnie Van Zant was the frontman. Anyway, so they then said, well, they're coming back to do a headline show at Hammersmith Odeon, which is a legendary venue in London. And they're playing on Guy Fawkes Night, which I don't know if you've heard of that. In England, we have a thing called Guy Fawkes Night. There was a guy that tried to blow up the Houses of Parliament years ago, and so we have fireworks to celebrate that. Believe it or not.
That's the V for Vendetta guy, right?
Yeah, it's similar. Yes, it's a similar sort of thing.
Right.
Anyway,
okay.
So Leonard Skinner were told not to let off fireworks, and of course they did. But before they came on, there's a bar upstairs in the circle area of the Hammersmith Odeon, which has a scorpion on top, a big life-sized one, which was used, I think, in one of the Ray Harryhausen films. And up on the top there, I couldn't believe it. I was looking up there, and was Artemis Pyle, the drummer, drinking a bottle of Jack Daniels before the band were going on stage. And then suddenly you heard this announcement saying, well, Artemis Pyle, please return to the stage. So he just literally ran through the stalls, jumped up on stage, and they played brilliant again. So that was my introduction to Southern rock. And then about 78, 79, I got into Sounds magazine, Jeff Barton. And I just saw an advert for Molly Hatchet. I thought, well, they look interesting. They look different. And someone said, oh, they're a bit like Leonard Skinner. And they're from Jacksonville, the same town. So I said, okay. So I bought it and was totally blown away. And by that time, I'd started writing for Sounds magazine. And then I found that there was this live LP that came. There's a certain edition that had a live LP with it. So I got that as well. It was recorded in New York with tracks like Bounty Hunter on it. And then the first time then they played the Reading Festival, but I just missed them, or the sound wasn't good. So I didn't have any recollection of it, or if I saw one song. So the first time I actually saw them was at A Day on the Green in 1980. In fact, I've written it down here. And it's when Jimmy Farrar had just joined the band on the Beating the Odds tour. And they were on a bill. They had these things called Day on the Green, which Bill Graham, the legendary guy, put on. And this was 1980. Journey was headlining. Black Sabbath were on the bill, Cheap Trick, Molly Hatchet, and a couple of other bands below them. And Molly Hatchet came on, and I've never seen anything like it. I know Confederate flags is a dirty word these days, but everywhere you could just see Confederate flags flying, and it was brilliant. And he was actually, a lot of people said bad things about Jimmy Farrar, about his weight, how he looked, and he could run over a truck. But he was actually a very good singer. Yeah. And they played when they did Dead and Gone, and for a few and far between, and Beating the Odds. They were just brilliant. And of course, they ended with a classic version of Boogie No More. Cheap Trick died an absolute death. Even though I like Cheap Trick, they just couldn't follow them. And it was like, really good. And by that time, I sort of got to know Hubeck a tiny bit. And then when the Deed Is Done album came out in sort of towards middle of '84, I went to the Kerrang, and said, look, they're playing New York. How about getting me out there and doing it? And they said, okay. So I saw them at the Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum. Actually, it was on my birthday, so it was a great day. And they were supporting Billy Squier.
Oh, okay. That's
Yeah,
right
but they
around
were
when his career started to crater, right?
Yeah, well, he'd reached his peak, but he was obviously still big enough to sell out the Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum,
Yeah.
which was a pretty. And Hatchet had quite a still big following then, and it was great to hear songs like "Satisfied Man," She Does,"
Yeah.
"Flirting with Disaster," "Heartbreak Radio," and it was great to see Danny Joe Brown back in the band again.
Yes.
Because I loved his solo album, by the way, as well.
I got a copy of that sucker.
Yeah,
right.
And what a name! Don't you just love the name Danny Joe Brown and the Danny Joe Brown Band? It's got to be one of the most crass titles ever. There are some great songs on that.
Yeah.
And then that's when I got backstage to talk to Hubeck.
Okay.
Which is that interview that you've just seen.
Right.
So I looked at him. The first thing I looked at him, I said, "So why aren't you drinking Jack Daniels?" I said, "I thought that was the staple diet for a Southern rock band." And he just pulled up a bottle of Crown Royal, which is a Canadian bourbon. He said, "This is what we drink. It doesn't fuck up the brain so much." And it's actually shaped. The bottle is shaped like a crown. Right. I said, "Yeah, but it's a Canadian." I said, "It's a Canadian." He said, "I don't care. That's what we drink, and that's our staple diet." And then
that's awesome.
Yeah, and then so that interview went very well, and then I saw them on various tours after that, but then I didn't. Then recently, I sort of went out of music for a bit with more my film stuff, but then came back into it later again. But I'll explain that when we talk about Kerrang. And then literally, there's a press company that does press just sent me an email this year saying, "Oh, Molly Hatchet are coming back, and they're recording at the legendary Abbey Road Studios, where the Beatles and all these sort of bands have made records." And they're supposed to be working with Andy Johns, but I never saw him there. Anyway, so I went down there, and Bobby Ingram was there, who claims he's now the longest surviving member of Hatchet.
Yeah.
Although I know he wasn't in the original, but and they played.
He's on Danny Joe's solo album. That's got to count for something, right?
Yeah, I suppose. And then John Galvin, I suppose, is quite a long-serving member as well now.
Yeah.
But then they introduced me to the new singer, Jimmy Elkins.
Oh, okay.
And he's got a fantastic voice. So they played 2 new songs, which will be on the next album. It hasn't got a title yet.
Now that's not the younger kid, right? Jimmy Elkins. Jimmy Elkins. I saw him with them a couple of years ago, but I thought their new kid was.
Unless I got it wrong, maybe I've got his name wrong. But
his name's Parker Lee.
Oh, Parker Lee, is it? Or maybe I've got that off a wrong thing. Anyway, this young kid was brilliant. Maybe I got his name wrong.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, Parker Lee.
Yeah, so the 2 songs they played were Firing Line, which was a pretty good straight-ahead rocker, the usual guitar solos, and had a bit of piano in it. But the second song was the killer song called Coming Home, which was like a new version of Boogie No More.
Oh, nice.
So it had a sort of moody opening, a bit like Fall of the Peacemakers.
Yeah.
And then it slowly build, and then the guitars come in, then the chicken scratch builds, and you get the piano bit again. And it was about 7 or 8 minutes long, this version. Okay. And it was, and they recorded both those songs in about 2 or 3 days at Abbey Road, and then they went straight on the road again. But I think they went to SPV, which is their current label, and said, "Look, we want to do a little mini tour of Europe. We also want to go to the Abbey Road." And SPV said, "Off you go." So it's like. And it was good to talk to Bobby Ingram. And then 3 days later, they played live at the 100 Club in London, which is right on Oxford Street, which is a legendary venue where The Who have played. And I saw Metallica there do a secret show. And it's one of those venues that's quite iconic. And the stage isn't that high up, and it's very atmospheric. And they came on, they were brilliant. I mean, the only thing I think is a bit odd about them these days is they need 2 guitars, I think. But it seems to be all Ingram. Yeah. So I think they still need that second guitar, which could explain why they didn't play Boogie No More.
Oh. Well, that is a source of contention in the fan base. Like, What's interesting to me is like I love Molly Hatchet, but whenever I look at some of their stuff online, I always see a bunch of comments of people kind of complaining about how it's not as good as the original lineup, and sometimes these comments get really mean. But one of the sticking points that I think is actually sort of interesting is what you just said, is that they used to be the 2 or even 3 guitar army on stage. Yeah. And now it's just Bobby. Although when I saw them, Bobby was shredding. So, I mean.
And here's another story, because I've done quite a few interviews with the producer Tom Werman, who did a lot of their early albums. I did like Blue Oyster Cult reissues with him, and then I did a couple of I bought out. There was a Hatchet box set that I interviewed him for, and I asked him. I said, "Well, how did?" Because he back then he was also like an A&R guy. So I said, how did you get to sign them? Did you send a demo or anything? He said, no, I physically got them up here while I was doing a Cheap Trick B-side, and I wanted to see what they could actually do. And he said when they plugged in and played, he'd never seen anything like it, with 3 guitars going, all beautifully in tune. And he said he signed them on the spot like that.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
And that's from the mouth of Tom Werman. So it shows that they were a live band that loved playing live. When I talked to Hubert, he said it was like guitar battles on stage. It was fantastic.
Yes.
And I remember when I've actually been, because I know Metallica quite well from the early days. I remember they came round to my house and I played them Blue Oyster Cult song, The Vigil, and then I played Boogie No More. And you should see James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich going with the tennis rackets. Because of course Cliff Burton, the bass player who sadly died.
Yes.
His whenever we talked about music, it was either Blue Oyster Cult or Leonard Skinner. They and quite often at sound checks, I know that Skinner they play Skinner stuff as well. So I think Hetfield and the sadly no longer Cliff were big Southern rock fans.
Oh no, that's awesome! I didn't know that.
Well, yeah.
I want to go back to some of what you said earlier about Molly Hatchet's popularity in Europe. There is definitely a sense that they are super beloved in Germany, and I know in the UK. In the United States, like, they had the big hit with Flirtin' with Disaster, but unfortunately, that's really the only one that still gets radio play today. Was that sort of the same thing in Europe? Did other songs of theirs get featured more heavily on radio? And why do you think they landed so much stronger in Europe than over here?
I don't know. I think because Southern, and it's also the Nordic countries love them, like Norway. Yeah. Finland, and it's the same because I know Bruce Brookshire from the band Doc Holliday. He told me exactly the same thing. He said we loved coming to Europe because everyone knew every song. You could actually see them sing the words, and it was the same with Hatchet. I never saw Hatchet in Germany. I only saw them in England, when they played there. But they told me that they love going around Europe because everybody knows every song, and they sing along with them as well. I think. And in Europe, there's a big thing about, obviously records and downloads, it's changed, but the minute a new album came out, boom, they go and buy it. And they didn't even read the reviews, because if they like the band, bang, they buy the record. So I think that's probably why, the minute Deed Is Done came out, I was out there, bang. And I loved all those early Frazetta covers as well. Oh. It was just like, and it was great. And when I first heard Double Trouble Live, I did a great review of that. And they were just one of those bands that were always good live. I saw them once in the Galvin era when they played a club. I think Hubeck wasn't very well. He came back and played with them for a bit. Yeah. So you could see them struggling a bit. It was almost like Hubeck was sitting down, but I could see he was struggling. But that was it was more to do with him than them not being good.
What did you think of Danny Joe Brown as a vocalist? Did you ever get a chance to meet him?
Yeah, briefly, but I met him. He had such a growly voice. It sounded like he was drinking Listerine or something. And but I was made, because that time I met them backstage after that show in New York. I was just dragged straight away to talk to Hubeck. I didn't have, the road manager said, "You're interviewing him." There was another journalist there, and she went and interviewed Danny Joe. So I never really got to talk to him, but I talked to him briefly. But I loved his vocals, and I love the gravelness of his vocals. And a lot of people, after he left the band, didn't like Jimmy Farrar, mainly because of his looks. Yeah. And I remember Hubeck saying, I think it was, is their manager Pat Armstrong saying, "Oh, we found this great vocalist. He's, he looks like the back end of a bus, but boy, can he sing." or words similar to that effect.
Yeah.
And he did, and he'd obviously learned the words because when he went for the rehearsal, he'd sung all the songs, and then he was on quite a few good albums. And I loved the Deed Is, I loved Beating the Odds. I thought it was a great album.
Yeah, I do too. But I guess for better or for worse, MTV was right around the corner when Danny Joe came back, and you did the cover story for them when they kind of made their first real effort on MTV with music videos for The Deed Is Done, and I forget the.
And they did a few more poppy songs as well.
Yeah,
but you got
I've seen it compared to like ZZ Top kind of thing.
Because I know Blackfoot, I know Ricky Medlock very well. Blackfoot tried it on a couple of their albums. They got Ken Hensley on keyboards, and I said it's fucking shit. I'm sorry about the swearing, but and he admitted it. He admitted it, but he said it was record company pressure, because at this point, don't forget, you had all these bands like Motley Crue, Rat, Poison, all taking over the MTV thing. So Southern rock sort of got pushed out the window for a bit. Yeah. The only Southern band that did well commercially when they swapped over was 38 Special.
There you go. Yep.
And that's another band I love. I'll never forget when I saw them support Foreigner. I mean, everyone turned up early to see them. And I actually had a Johnny Van Zant T-shirt on because he had his own band, and his brother saw it, and I was the one that caught the bottle of Jack Daniels.
That's awesome.
Because I love Johnny Van Zant. I love Johnny Van Zant's band as well.
Yeah.
It's funny.
They did.
But you see, 38 Special were very clever. They knew which direction to go in, yet they could still sound Southern, but with a real commercial. And they were the only ones that did it successfully, I think.
Yeah.
That crossover.
I think you're right. I mean, I think that the music on The Deed Is Done is really good, but it didn't have that crossover success that like Flirting with Disaster did here, unfortunately.
I mean, I love the song She Does. The saxophone in that is great. The guitar's great. The thing is, sometimes I get a feeling the record execs don't know which song to put out. I think that song would have done really well if it had come out.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. So okay, Leo, what else do we want? Okay, so Danny Joe had a ton of health issues, I know, near the end of the 80s, and eventually the guy who took over was named Phil McCormick. Did you ever see them play with Phil, or was that kind of a mid gap? No, okay.
No,
have you ever listened to any of the albums they did with Phil?
Yeah, they're okay, but it's the trouble is you get used to a certain voice,
right?
And even though I pretend you forget what Jimmy Farrar looked like, I liked his voice.
Yeah.
I always thought Danny Joe Brown was the voice of Molly Hatchet, but I thought, The Deed Is Done, Beating the Odds, Jimmy Farrar, that's a very, very good Molly Hatchet album. I mean, he did a few albums with him, didn't he, Jimmy Farrar?
Yeah, he did. I got it here. It's it's another one of these great covers. The Take No Prisoners one. This is Jimmy Farrar.
Yeah.
And look at
I see he's lost a bit of weight on that cover. They squeezed him in. A lot of people made a comment about that. He'd gone for a workout in Nassau. But I remember when they were making Beating the Odds, he said how they used to hang out with Tom Tom Club because they were recording in the next studio, and Tina Weymouth really liked the guys.
Wow, that is an odd combination. I love the Tom Tom Club. That's awesome.
Yeah, I did. And they were just in the next studio, and they'd go and hang out with each other.
Well, I know they did. What always throws me off about on one of these albums, they did a song with the woman from Mother's Finest, which is
I love that. Was a great band.
Yeah,
Momo, I know the guitarist. I met him a few times. They were great.
Yeah, so I mean that's another.
Iron Age is a good. They had an album called Iron Age. That was great.
Okay,
came out in Atlantic. Yeah, really good.
Yeah, well, I just think it's fascinating that there's a Molly Hatchet connection there. No one would have ever guessed that Mother's Finest and Molly Hatchet would do something together.
Yeah. But having heard those two new songs, to me, it sounds like they do sound fresh and new, but at the same time, it's like, let's give them what they really want.
Yeah.
Let's almost go back to the Boogie No Mores and all that. And it's really well written. That Coming Home song, the minute you hear it, you'll love it.
No, I'm really looking forward to that because I think the biggest problem with kind of the Phil McCormick later era, the Bobby Ingram led years, is that it's almost too metal. It's almost not Southern enough,
No, this feels like it's going more back that other direction. They weren't, for some reason, they didn't play any new ones live. I don't think there's some sort of licensing thing.
Okay.
I mean, they played it to us in the studio, and that was great. But it's good to hear them. But it's like, oh, wait till the album comes out. But he says they have written all the songs for the album. So but I don't think. I think the rest of it will be done where their base is, or wherever. Are they still live in Jacksonville?
Yeah, I think they're still based out of Jacksonville. Yeah.
Yeah.
So of all of I've got a couple on screen here, and I know that you've worked on some of the reissues. They've got this great, the first 3 records had the Frank Frazetta album artwork, and all of the rest have all the rest of the good ones have been inspired by Frazetta, at least. What are your favorite album covers of theirs?
The three you've got there, and I actually quite like the is it which is the one where they're all walking together in a cowboy town?
Oh yeah. Right. No guts,
that
no glory.
Yeah, I mean, that just shows that's them, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think they should have had the guitars over their backs,
That's very good.
And Double Trouble Live, that's it's just photos of them, isn't it? Yeah.
That one's kind of.
But no, it's just, I mean, I think the top left on there, Flirting with Disaster, is such a good album.
Oh yeah.
And the production, Tom Werman said that was such fun to produce because they were so on it.
Yeah. I think album artwork is just like a lost art that, I think it kind of peaked in the 80s because I think of these guys, I think of like Asia, like bands that had these great visions of artwork, and you just don't see it as much anymore. But anyway, so let's say you're meeting someone who's never heard a Molly Hatchet song before. We could do like a top 5, or what would be the first things you would point them to if they wanted to get into Molly Hatchet?
Boogie No More.
Oh yeah,
that would be number 1. I said, if you want to hear good guitar that just builds and builds and builds and builds and builds, I play that one. Flirting with Disaster, the song. What's the one that goes, I'm walking down? It's the one that starts with a heavy bass on Flirting with Disaster.
Oh, let's take a look here.
Read out the tracks.
Whiskey Man, It's All Over Now. One Man's Pleasure.
That's it. I love the groove of that one. And it dum and then I mean, that is just so southern, and it's just that script. And I love it when the guitars are all going together. So you got one doing one thing, one doing another, and it's just like lots and lots of layers. And you think, how do you climb over all this? And it takes you over. And the thing I love, Blugie Mo says, the boy's going to give it to you one time, and then another layer comes on. So I still, I'd say Boogie No More is still their best song.
Absolutely. So tell me about, when you interviewed Huelbeck in, what was it, late 84, early 85, what do you remember about his personality? What do you remember about, because I remember you were asking him about some kind of touchy topics about Jimmy Farrar being out of the band and Danny Joe back in, and you could kind of tell he was a little, uncomfortable. What was it like talking to him?
It was fine because once he saw that I was an actual fan, and I think he must have read some of my stuff. I mean, maybe he hadn't, but it looked like he had. And I started questioning. He said, "Oh, well, here's someone who knows what they're talking about." And then when I asked him if he had any whiskey, that's when he passed me the Crown Royal, which I just held on to. And in fact, I got another picture of me and Doc Holliday. Actually, I am holding Jack Daniels in that one. And he just started, I thought, well, I want to get the Farrar thing out of the way. And that's when he told me about, what Pat Armstrong said about him. But he said, listen, it was a gap to fill because at that point, Danny Joe gone. I think Danny had drink problem or something. I can't remember the actual reason they got rid of him. Can you? Or what?
Well, Danny Joe has always had health problems, but I read in an interview that they said that they kind of
did he have bad asthma or something?
Yeah, right. And they said but they also said, like, I think Hubeck once said that they kind of used that as an excuse, but because drinking was also a huge problem at that time.
Yeah. One man's liver is another man's pickle. But he was actually, he was a bit cagey at first, but then once I started asking more, it seemed like he was quite happy to talk about it. And then the fact we started talking about songs and how the record company were trying to change them, and bringing Danny Joe Brown back was, he was obviously ready to come back. Maybe he got over what he was going through. I thought, well, let's give it another shot with our original singer. Maybe people were moaning that they couldn't really market Jimmy Ferrari. I mean, they could make him look thinner on an album cover, but in real life, they obviously couldn't. So, and maybe it was a bit because, Danny Joe's obviously a lot thinner.
Yeah.
and he was the original voice. It's like replacing Roger Daltrey in The Who. Yeah. Or, it worked with, say, Van Halen. I actually thought Sammy Hagar, although Roth was a great frontman, I thought Hagar had the better voice.
Hey, now see, you're not going to get any argument from me. I'm also partial to Sammy Hagar, but not at the expense of Diamond Dave. I love them both.
I know, yeah. And he always says, we were filming here tonight, and there was clearly no film in the camera. But so I'd say that Hubeck was very easygoing. And when he seemed quite relaxed, because I think the band were in quite a good place. They'd got this new record out, got on a Billy Squier tour, and I actually think they went down better than Billy Squier, personally.
Yeah, I believe that.
So
So recently, when you saw them in the studio, did you get a chance to talk to Bobby Ingram, or have you spoke to Bobby before?
Yeah, no, because he came, because there were there's about 10 other journalists there, most of whom I knew.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just for me. It was like obviously an invite for European press.
Yeah.
And then because the guy, a friend of mine, who runs this press company or co-runs this press company, said, "Oh, they specifically asked for you to come along." So I thought, well, they obviously do know me because I'd recently reviewed that reissue of those albums. And then he said, "So which one are you?" I said, "Oh yeah, I know you." And then he said, we started talking. I said, "So tell me about the new album." He said, "Well, we're getting back to what we do best." And I said, "So how come you came to do it over here?" He said, "Well, we just wanted to come back to Europe. We went to SPV and we said, well, how about letting us record at the legendary Abbey Road studios?" And of course, there are pictures, some press pictures of them doing that walk across the road like the Beatles.
Okay.
And there's great pictures of them outside. And so I think it was also an excuse for them to go and record in a legendary studio. Now, rumor has it was supposed to be Andy Johns. He's quite a well-known producer.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I never saw him there, but what I heard sounded very good. All the instruments were clear as a bell, and they sort of went out the room for a bit, and two of them came back. It was Ingram and I think it was John Galvin came back, and they were at the back, and they could see, they were looking at people's reactions, and you could see they had a big smile on their face. And I was sitting right down at the front of the mixing desk, and I was tapping my foot like crazy. And then, of course, the firing line, because I asked him about the songs, he said, "Oh, well, the firing line's pretty well straight ahead rocker, but Coming Home's a real bit slow builder." And that was the one I was waiting for. And as I told you, I think it's about 7 or 8 minutes. Wow. And then when it finished, we all chatted about it. And I said, "God, that's the new Boogie No More." And everyone laughed. So it's almost like they sort of knew that. But maybe that, and I think it's a good thing, not a bad thing. But then again, it had a nice sort of fresh feel to it. So it didn't feel like a rip-off of Boogie No More. It actually it built slower. Okay. And then the guitars come in and the piano comes in. And then it just sort of goes crazy at the end.
Good. I'm excited to hear it. I hope it doesn't take too long to come out, because I don't think they've done like a new album in like almost 15 years. But okay, so last Molly Hatchet question. So you were part of these reissues. There was like a box set. This was all through like Rock Candy, right?
Yeah, which is now a magazine.
Oh yeah, yes. So can you tell me about how did you get into doing those reissues?
Right. Okay. So Rock Candy is run by a guy called Derek Oliver, who used to be an A&R guy at Atlantic, but he's actually used to be a Kerrang writer as well, and he used to write all the AOR sort of more wimpy stuff like The Ladder and bands like that, and had a very good ear for music and appreciated all sorts of music. And then he started up a label called Rock Candy, which was basically reissuing all these classic 80s albums, but giving you an extra layer to them by putting out these CD booklet notes, and also getting extra tracks like live tracks or outtakes. So you can actually see who fell out with who produced it, how the songs came together, where the band was originally from. So I've just recently done one on that legendary band Q5 from Seattle, which is, you know, Floyd Rose, the tremolo pickup system. So they've reissued Still the Light, which is a classic album. And it's also got Rick Pierce from TKO.
Okay. So you've been a part of a number of reissues.
Yeah, I've done quite a few. And I've done when Buck Dharma from Blois Occult, we reissued his solo album Flat Out. And there's little things about that I never knew. He said, look at the album cover carefully. If you look, all the tires are flat. So that's why it's called Flat Out. So it's an old 50s Oldsmobile with these flat tires, but you'd never know unless you looked at the album. So these little things are all interesting. And then you really get personal with the band because they give you all these things. And then there's another Canadian band called Zon, who are sort of very good prog rocky band. And Howard Helm was the keyboard player. And he gave us extra live tracks and things, what we put on that. So I've just done their second album for him that's come out. And then there's another offshoot late. So that's the Rock Candy one. And then I've also done a Molly Hatchet reissue box set on another label called HNE, which is part of Cherry Red Records.
Oh, Cherry Red, right? Yeah, I saw those.
Yeah. So Cherry Red's a company that started up sort of late, sort of 80s or 79, and it's run by a guy who also owns Wimbledon Football Club. So the stadium is sponsored through him. So, but they're another label that, and the product guy there, Steve Hammonds, he does all the stuff for Rock Candy as well. And then about 3 years ago, Rock Candy started up a magazine, which has done very well. Yeah. You can get it in America now, and it comes out like every 8 weeks. And the current one has, it had Kiss on the cover. So, I mean, you know, but then we had Journey on the cover, REO Speedwagon on the cover. So it's bands from that ilk, really.
Yeah.
And then we started introducing newer bands as well. So that's how that happened. So that's how the Rock Candy thing came up. And they just phoned me up because they know I know a lot about Hatchet. Said, do you want to do that one? Oh, well, yeah. So I went, yeah. So there was no one really new to interview. So what I tended to do is go back to my old interviews and collate them into that.
Very cool.
And then, of course, there's the whole thing about Hatchet Molly. Do you know about her?
No. What's that?
Oh, right. Well, the name Molly Hatchet originally, apparently.
Oh. Yes, I do know. Yes.
And she's a prostitute that killed people with a hatchet. Which I thought, I never knew that. And apparently she still haunts a certain railway track in the deep south somewhere.
Oh, yeah. Going through their history, that to me is like one of the most just metal things I came across. That's one of the best reasons to name a band,
Yeah. Well, I mentioned the Hatchet Molly one in that box reissue, so it's quite a funny story.
Yeah.
And then again, I asked people like Medlight, so what do you think of Hatchet? He said, people like Hatchet, but they say they're a bit like Skinner or a bit like this. It's because both bands come from Jacksonville.
Right.
And I actually think Ronnie actually quite liked them from what I've heard.
Yeah,
I think
he was supposed to produce the first record.
Now, is it true he produced a demo of theirs? Is that right?
I don't know if he produced a demo, but he was supposed to produce that first album, but then the plane crashed.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
But yeah, they all knew each other growing up. So
yeah, that's
okay, man.
Yeah.
Hey, these are great Molly Hatchet stories. I really appreciate this. But let's